Today we find ourselves discussing the performance of one of the more enigmatic figures to hold the office of Secretary of the Navy in the modern era, Fred Korth. Appointed by President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Korth served as Secretary from January 4, 1962 until his resignation on November 1, 1963. In the annals of naval leadership, Korth stands out not for monumental achievements, but for a rather grim legacy. A legacy that places him at number 27 out of 28 modern Secretaries of the Navy, earning a very, very low score on our ranking scale. This, as you might guess, is far from a position of honor. To fully understand this ranking and to understand Korth's abilities, we must examine Korth's tenure through the key criteria that govern the Secretary of the Navy's success, both by the 1947 Defense Reorganization Act and the 1949 Amendment, and his Title X requirements for recruitment, training, equipping, and aligning the United States military to the President's policies and the stewardship of the United States Navy's budget. Let us therefore embark on a dispassionate analysis of Fred Korth's term, focusing on each of these metrics as they are the pillars upon which any Secretary of the Navy must stand. Recruitment. A Secretary of the Navy must actively find and select individuals to join the United States Navy, bring in America's finest. Fred Korth's influence on Navy recruitment was minimal, and in truth, his tenure was far too brief to leave any significant imprint. While recruitment is one of the foremost tasks for a secretary, Korth's attention was diverted towards maintaining the policies already in place, rather than innovating or driving new initiatives. His focus remained steadfastly on Cold War issues, particularly the expansion of the Navy's technological capabilities, rather than strengthening the force with new recruits. It's a simple fact that the Navy's recruitment policies and the type of recruits that we were bringing in and the type of Americans we were finding stagnated during his time at the helm. And this failure to inspire or reorganize recruitment efforts left little in the way of positive change. His marginal influence here places him squarely with a score of 4 out of 10. Training. A Secretary of the Navy must provide these new recruits with the necessary training to fight the nation's wars. Next, we will turn there, an area where Korth's focus was more felt. Korth's tenure, while brief, was marked by an emphasis on modernizing the Navy's technical capabilities, especially in the realms of aviation and submarines. This was no doubt a necessary and important development during the Cold War, where technological superiority was often vital as manpower. However, this focus on technology came at a cost. The Navy's readiness in terms of leadership development and personnel training suffered, as Korth's administration failed to address systemic morale and retention problems within the ranks. Training became increasingly technical, yet the core issues of leadership and personnel well-being were sidelined. While Korth did improve the technical proficiencies of sailors to some extent, the long-term impact on Navy readiness was less than desired. Thus, he earns a solid 6 out of a possible 10. Not exceptional, especially when you look at terms of readiness from training. But there was some merit. The next pillar we will look at is equipping the force. They must provide our United States Navy with the type and capacity and equipment and maintenance to perform their intended role. Fred Korth's mismanagement of the Navy's equipment acquisition programs was one of the darker aspects of his time as secretary. His tenure saw significant delays and cost overruns in critical shipbuilding and modernization programs, particularly during the early 1960s. The Soviet Union's aggressive push in expanding its nuclear-powered fleet presented a formidable challenge, one that Korth's leadership was ill-equipped to confront. The United States Navy lagged behind, especially in submarine production, as shipyards struggled to meet the demands of modernization. While the Navy's aviation capabilities saw some improvement, Korth's failure to keep pace with the need for a modern and well-equipped fleet placed the Navy at a disadvantage. For this failure, he scores a 4 out of a possible 10. The next category is alignment to the policies and strategies of the President and the Secretary of Defense. When it comes to aligning with the strategic priorities of the President and the Department of Defense, Korth was a steady, if uninspired, hand. The Cold War dominated the landscape of military policy during the early 1960s, and Korth's leadership did not stray from that course. He understood the pressing need for nuclear deterrence and ensuring that the Navy remained prepared for the ongoing threat posed by the Soviet Union. However, while Korth's policies were in line with the broader objectives of President Kennedy's administration, he did little to push the envelope or introduce any groundbreaking strategies. In this respect, Korth earns a score of 8 out of 10. He was a competent executor of Cold War priorities, but did not demonstrate the innovation and foresight that marked the best of his peers. Finally, budget and efficiency. The Secretary of the Navy has a responsibility to maximize the impact of public funds, deliver better quality services to its military, and to ensure that we are meeting our requirements as good stewards of the people's money and minimizing waste to deliver the fight as effectively and efficiently as possible. This is where Fred Korth's performance truly falters. The Navy's budget under his leadership was a disaster, plagued by inefficiencies, delays, and rising costs. Major procurement programs, such as the Skyhawk fighter and new ship classes, were marred by mismanagement, and the Navy shipbuilding programs were a constant source of congressional scrutiny. Korth failed to impose fiscal discipline, and the cost overruns were not just financial failures, they were strategic failures, leaving the Navy with a bloated budget and a diminished capability. This financial mismanagement ultimately led to his resignation, underscoring just how significant the consequences were. For his abysmal stewardship of the Navy's resources, Korth receives a score of 3 out of 10, one of the lowest scores in modern Secretary of the Navy history. In summation, Fred Korth's tenure as Secretary of the Navy was defined by his inability to address the key challenges facing the Navy in his time. His short term in office and lack of impactful leadership left him with a total score of 25 out of 50. His focus on Cold War priorities was competent, but his failure to address recruitment, training, and equipping and budget leadership during his brief and largely forgettable time in office. For that, he remains the second worst modern Secretary of the Navy, remembered not for achievements, but from missed opportunities and management failures that left the Navy less prepared for the future. Until next time, goodbye.